Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our storage design and modeling working group for uplift and default energy bids for outage management. My name is Brenda Marquez. On behalf of the stakeholder group, we're here to provide a hybrid meeting. For those who are joined virtually, we'll be providing few instructions. Sergio, if you could do me the honors, thank you. This call is being recorded for informational and community purposes only and will be available on the CAISO website later on. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is also structured to stimulate open dialogue and engage diverse perspectives. And as facilitator, we'll be providing guidance for comments and questions to ensure productive flow. And we also like to say that we please keep remarks succinct and avoid revisiting points that have been already covered, allowing space for all voices. Closed captioning is available on the bottom left of your screen. The transparency viewer is available on the right of your screen. And then we could go to the next slide. For those who are on site, feel free to place your hand up or we can call on you at your turn. Those who are virtual, please use the virtual hand to be on the question queue. And for everyone that will be speaking or asking questions, just a reminder, please state your full name and affiliation. If you're only dialed in through the phone line, utilize the dial *3 to be added to the question queue. And you can send questions to all panelists. We'll be monitoring those questions as well. And Stacy's online as well for the Inteller events for technical issues. This is a stakeholder policy initiative process that we launched a few months ago, detailing a little bit about our policy development phase of where we're at. We are showing this through the process guide we also posted. Within this initiative, we are currently within the scope. Sergio will be covering a little bit more on that, but we are kind of approaching the next phase of this process. For today's agenda, we plan to cover a few items. Sergio will be taking on most of the discussion today. He'll be leaning on meeting goals and initiative overview. Then about halfway through, we'll kind of go to the draft straw proposal for the storage default energy bid enhancements. And around 10, we'll kind of shift towards the overview of the NGR bidding concept put forth by the Market Surveillance Committee. And then we'll have like a time for discussion as well for a quick break. And then after that, at 11, we'll do an overview on outage management with second revised straw proposal with Dinesh. He's not here right now, but he'll be here momentarily. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass it to Sergio to take on this call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you everyone for joining us at the ISO's offices and on the phone. So we are a little bit behind schedule, so I will really appreciate if we can keep that in mind as we go through. We do have a lot to cover, so let's get going. So first, I wanted to share a little bit about the meeting goals for today. As Brenda said, we'll share a draft straw proposal on the storage default energy bids, a topic that we've been talking about for the meetings we've had this year. Then we'll talk about a bidding concept that pairs really well with this DEB framework we'll discuss. This bidding concept was originally put forth by the MSC in their opinion a couple of years back, but it's pretty relevant given ongoing discussions around storage modeling. And then finally, my colleague Dinesh will provide an overview of the second revised straw proposal on outage management that we published a couple of weeks back, and we'd like to address any clarifying questions ahead of the deadline for written comments. So let me tell you how this meeting fits into what we think the initiative should advance in the coming months. We've produced materials this year on mixed fuel resources, also now on outage management, as we'll discuss later. And our goal is to now focus this conversation and the upcoming conversations more so on DEB enhancements and some other modeling enhancements. We think that given the feedback we got from stakeholders to prioritize reform to the storage debt paradigm, it would be valuable to focus our upcoming postings, straw proposal on uplift debt and SOC management, on enhancing the storage debt, and on rethinking certain elements of storage modeling. Those two elements are expected to be included in a straw proposal that we're targeting late June. And then after that, once we complete all of those processes associated with that straw proposal, then we'll assess whether there are additional BCR changes that are needed. I think this is in line with a lot of the feedback we got of, let's prioritize areas where we know there are challenges today, and then reassess once we have more data whether additional BCR modifications are needed. So this is the timeline that we're thinking of right now. The first two bullets have to do with our meeting today and the comments that will be due on June 1st. And following that, as you can see, we'll have this cadence of producing a proposal and updating it, having a meeting, getting comments, with the goal of achieving a draft final proposal on uplift debt and state of charge management by the end of October of this year. Okay, I'll pause here briefly to see if there's any questions or thoughts before we go into the first content of this meeting. I see Alba has his hand raised online. Oh, I think it was just lowered. Alba, if you are trying to speak, you might be double muted. Oh,
yeah, I had some problem with my microphone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Just on that timeline, I was curious because I hadn't seen these slides. I hadn't reviewed the slides before the meeting, but assuming that most of the focus was going to be on the paper that had been published. The handling of what's known as foldback in our discussions, what sounded like it was coming to an implementation proposal, and I'm just curious where that fits. Are you going to wait on that until October 30th? Because it had sounded like you might undertake to get something. You said at earliest spring of 2027, so I was thinking there might be some action taken earlier than that in order to facilitate that.
Yes, thank you for that question, Alba. My apologies for being unclear. So the outage management paper that we put out and that discusses nonlinearity and we'll discuss later today, we believe that as we get feedback on that paper, we'll be able to pivot that project into implementation. Based on our assessment of that topic, the implementation of the nonlinearity modeled solution will not require tariff modification. So we can undertake it as once we get your feedback, the feedback of stakeholders, we can kind of pivot into implementation. And then once that is implemented, we'll modify the BPMs necessary accordingly. What I'm trying to discuss with the timeline I just shared really has to do with these two topics, of focusing our next straw proposal development on dev enhancements and storage bidding enhancements. And that timeline that I'm sharing here relates specifically to those topics. From our perspective, the next steps on outage management and nonlinearity really are getting your feedback and moving on to implementation with that. Yeah.
So will there be some form of draft final proposal on that as well in the same time frame of June or July?
So generally, for a draft final proposal being produced, it's usually when it requires this kind of tariff modification and approval from governing body or board. But we could consider doing that for closing out the topic. If you'd like to include that as well in your written comments, that's very valuable.
Yeah, I probably will, because the only thing I'd suggest is that while conceptually the logic of it is very simple, it interacts with a lot of different things, and so I think those need to be sort of spelled out in a proposal before moving to implementation. That would be my suggestion there.
Perfect. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have other hands at this point? I don't believe so. Well, with that, then let's get started with the first section of the content for today. I'll try to wrap this piece up by 10, so let's keep that in mind. Okay, so in the following slides, I will provide an overview of our draft straw proposal to modify the storage depth calculation. We have thought long and hard about how to change the storage tab in a manner that is aligned with all the feedback we've received from stakeholders. The proposal we're putting out here today that will inform the materials we're working on for a draft for a straw proposal, sorry, will include very minimal differences between how the storage tab is calculated in CAISO or EDAM and the WEIM only storage tab. It really minimizes any difference in the in that paradigm or calculation. It also includes elements of the hydro deb, given some feedback we received from stakeholders, and it can be readily leveraged under how we are thinking about storage bidding modeling today. So before we get going, I'd like us to have a couple slides to level set to make sure we're all on the same page on what the storage deb is and how it's calculated today. So today, the default energy bid for option for storage is defined as I've included in this slide here, the calculation. It really accounts for both the battery's round trip efficiency and their duration, and it includes different cost components. The goal of the default energy bid is to be able to, you know, produce level a price cost estimate really that is aligned with what may be perceived as a cost by resources in instances under mitigation. So there are three elements, three cost components that go into today's storage deb. The first one is the energy cost. The energy cost is trying to estimate the average cost of energy to charge the storage resource. We calculate default energy bids for the day ahead and the real-time market. So here in this slide, you can see how the energy costs are calculated differently in day ahead and in real time. But overall, in both of these markets, timeframes, we are leveraging outputs from a prior market process to be able to estimate these energy costs. So in day ahead, we source the energy costs from the day ahead LMPs that result from the market power mitigation run. And in real time, we source the energy costs from the day ahead LMPs that came from the integrated forward market run. So both in this component of energy cost and the next one, the price-based opportunity costs, we are leveraging, let's say, quote unquote, stale outputs or outputs from a prior market run to estimate the costs that the storage resources may face. The second cost component, as I mentioned, is the price-based opportunity cost. Here, we're trying to estimate what's that opportunity cost when the storage asset must determine when to discharge at various hours of the day. So in general, you know, a resource that discharges ahead of the hours that are the highest priced will will see an opportunity cost there. They could have used that stored energy in another interval where the value of that energy was higher. And once more, we are calculating this price-based opportunity cost based on outputs from prior market runs. In the case of day ahead, once more from the market power mitigation process. In the case of real time, it's coming from the integrated forward market runs. The third estimate, the third cost component included in the storage depth today is the variable storage operations cost. And this is a cost that seeks to represent cycling and other variable operational costs like degradation, for example. This is a value that is provided by scheduling coordinators if they wish to register a non-zero value. Today, if they desire to include a non-zero value, they can do so via city ticket. But if scheduling coordinators do not wish to register a non-zero value, then we'll just enter a 0 as default. This is the only of the three cost components really that is not leveraging outputs from prior market runs, and it comes directly from the SC. And from our understanding and the information we have, it does vary significantly by technology, particularly manufacturer and the age of the asset. So because today, two of the three cost components included in the storage DEB are coming from outputs of prior market runs, WEIM only storage resources, that is, resources that do not participate in EDEM, they're not able to readily leverage the storage DEB option. Instead, they must either pursue a negotiated DEB or pick any of the other DEB options that they may be eligible for. So with all of this context, we really get to the problem statements that we identified in our paper in December. Here, I try to offer kind of a summarized view of those problem statements. The first one being, we have a strong dependence today on outputs from prior market runs, and that creates two challenges. First, those values may be stale. They're now values that are coming from prior runs that might not be perfectly accurate, right, to what will occur in the run where the DEB is actually leveraged. And second, with expanding footprint, the resources that are not part of EDEM cannot readily leverage this storage DEB option and instead need to opt for a negotiated DEB or some other DEB option for which they might be eligible. And the final part of the problem statement really has to do with the fact that today, the real-time storage DEB, based on how it's defined, outputs a single value for the whole day. And this might create challenges of over or underestimating opportunity costs at different hours of the day, since it's static throughout the whole actual trade dates that we care about. So with that, in the December paper and through conversations since, we've boiled down to three guiding principles on how to think about reforming DEBs. The first one is that the storage DEB should be designed in a way that reflects changing real-time opportunity costs so that it can ensure the correct placement of storage in the bit stack, even under mitigation. And by that, this idea of the correct placement of the storage under mitigation, it's really trying to get at the notion that we may not want to leverage energy limited resources ahead of time, let's say, and we should, to the degree possible, preserve that state of charge to the moments where it's the most valuable. The second guiding principle is that we should have a storage DEB that is calculated in a way where all resources should be able to readily leverage it as a DEB option. This goes back to that point of WEIM resources cannot leverage this option today. So we should have a definition, an approach, a calculation that enables them to leverage this as an option without going through a negotiated process. And the final piece that was actually more so included through further discussions after the December publication is that the DEB should be designed in a way that minimizes the risk of charge side mitigation. So we've done quite a few discussions on the DEB since January. And since then, we've been working on this notion of a time of day concept for the storage DEB. We got a very good, complete comments since our meeting in March. And in those comments, we saw that a significant share of stakeholders do have an interest in something like the multiplier-based time of day approach, and that other stakeholders also generally support the idea of developing a readily available WEIM-only storage default energy bid. But we also saw comments that expressed some concern about whether we should have any form of difference between a CAISO EDAM storage DEB and a storage DEB that can be leveraged by the WEIM-only resources. In general, the stakeholders argued that we should strive for a single, consistent DEB framework that has no difference really between the geographies or markets in which these resources are participating in. So in addition to this feedback, we also heard from stakeholders recommendation to go back and look at what the Market Surveillance Committee offered in their opinion when we first adopted the storage default energy bids. When we took a look back at the December 2020 opinion, you can see that the MSC really argues, goes through an assessment of what should be generally included or not in a storage DEB. And in that assessment, the MSC argues that charging costs are generally unnecessary to consider within the DEB calculation because they're included in day ahead and they're sunken costs in real time. That variable storage operation costs should always be a part of bids and therefore should always be a part of DEBs. And finally, that opportunity costs, while they may not be necessary to include in day ahead, they continue to be relevant in real time since they allow for resources to be able to manage their state of charge. So it would be good to keep including them in the DEB calculation in real time. And the final kind of source of feedback we've gone to develop this draft straw proposal, has come from a couple of stakeholders that have advocated for basically rethinking the storage DEB with the hydro DEB in mind. In their comments, the stakeholders generally opposed the time of day concept. And instead supported kind of modifying a little bit the existing hydro DEB so that it could fit or adapt better to the needs of storage. And these stakeholders have argued that having a storage DEB that is generally similar or comparable to the hydro DEB is desirable because it would achieve that goal of maintaining the position in the bid stack of storage alongside other energy limited resources, even under mitigation. So before I go into the proposal, the draft straw proposal there, I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or additions, either in the chat or elsewhere, and then we'll go and jump into the draft straw proposal. I see Alba has his hand up.
You'll be double muted. Check. Alvin?
I've been unmuted now. You can hear me,
Okay.
can you not, Brenda? Great, thank you.
Yes, we can.
And I'm sorry if I stepped in front of any, I think others may have things to say about this, but I just wanted to make two comments. One is I'm skeptical of the MSC's comment about charging just because they don't seem to be aware that charging costs are part of the DEB construction and they can actually be affected by mitigation to the DEB. So I think that is something that needs to be considered as to whether that's actually valid, except in a very conceptual way for the construction of the DEB. And the second point is I think there's a merit in for CAISO to think about the sort of the general perspective of WPTF and Vistra, if I'm understanding it, is that the DEBs need to put the resources into the correct dispatch order for the most efficient solution. And I think this needs to be one of the benchmarks that should be considered not just before, but also after such a DEB is created. And I think the acid test would be if, because this is, I think, is in fact how things would work if a cost-based bidding were imposed by FERC for a particular resource, is would the DEB result, and looking both at day ahead and real time, would the DEB result in efficient use of the battery, or would it potentially result in an inefficient schedule that would require effectively bid cost recovery? So I think what that needs to be sort of stated clearly. I don't think it's as simple as what the MSC has set forth, but I think they have the basic idea correct, that if you recover your variable costs and your charging costs, that's a minimum threshold for an efficient solution, in system terms as well as resource terms. So just those are just my comments. I appreciate how you've set these comments out, Sergio.
Thank you, Alva. Well, let me comment quickly on the first point around the MSC's thoughts on charging costs. I do think that the opinion, when it was issued, did not, fully consider this interaction between mitigation and the charging bids. But we are definitely considering that as
Right.
part of the goal here. So I think it is possible, as I go through the kind of concept in the coming slides, it is possible to marry the concept we're sharing here with, I don't want to think about it as mitigating charging bids, but more so around ensuring that all bids, even when mitigated, comply with the monotonically non-decreasing shape that they need. Because today, as we've discussed in prior meetings, really the reason why we end up seeing mitigation of charging bids is because of that need for monotonicity. So
Right.
I think we need to rethink this bit as not really a mitigation of the charging bid, but more so an adjustment to the bid so that it can continue to comply with the monotonicity and it still minimizes the risk of that mitigation affecting the ability of the asset to charge. So thank you very much for that comment, because I do
Well
think
stated.
that's something we need to work in. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing that brought up to my mind is that I think they're also wrong about looking at charging costs in real time as purely sunken costs, because in fact, even in the framework that people bid in real time, there is anticipation of charging as well as charging that's already been done that factors into the construction of their opportunity costs from the perspective of a battery operator. So just they're a little bit oversimple in some of their conclusions. But I think what you've just said gives me some assurance that that's being considered very, very strongly there. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am not seeing other hands in the queue now or in the room, so I'll keep on. Okay, so let's get to what are we thinking of? What's the draft straw proposal here? This is a busy slide, but I think the best way to read it is from left to right. Every column is basically telling you how we will modify the current DEB to get to the draft straw proposal, right? So let's start with the easier ones that are the CAISO EDAM rows. So in the first step, really, the first step is actually applicable to everyone, CAISO EDAM or WEAM. And the first step is, let's take out the energy cost component from the DEB and let's include the gas floor component from the hydro DEB. We are doing this because energy costs are sunken costs and because the gas floor is included in the hydro DEB. So we want to conform the storage DEB to the hydro DEB so that they're more comparable and that we can ensure that storage will preserve its correct position in the bid stack even when mitigated. And we would do this across markets and timeframes. Then the second step is really where the only difference arises between the CAISO EDAM DEB and the WEAM only DEB. In the second step, we would introduce a step to scale the proxies that we use today for the price-based opportunity cost. So remember, in the current DEB, we used outputs from the prior market runs to inform the energy costs and the price-based opportunity cost. We will continue to do so here, but we will scale the outputs that we're leveraging so that we can address that quote unquote stale values issue. For EDAM resources, we would scale the market power mitigation outputs based on their difference relative to the ahead LMPs. And in the real time, we would scale the day ahead LMPs based on their difference to the real time LMPs. This might be a process, that is not conducted within the market on a daily basis. It's more so we are able to get a scaling multiplier, let's say for the year, and that's the scaling we're using. And this allows us to minimize the challenges posed by those stale values. And again, this is the only step where there would be a difference between the EDAM DEB and the WEIM DEB. Because in the WEIM DEB, rather than scaling the day ahead LMPs, we would scale the DGAP prices. And this is because WEIM only resources, they do not have day ahead LMPs. In this step, basically then we are able to get over that challenge of the stale values. In the third step, we get a DEB value, and this DEB value is using the formula I've just described, but it does not leverage the multiplier yet. You might all be familiar that all the DEBs have this multiplier. We are preserving the multiplier for step 4, where we're going to use it in a different way than just simply the 1.1 we have today. So in the fourth step, there will be a difference between day ahead and real time. In day ahead, we'll use a 1.1 multiplier for both the gas floor and the variable storage operating cost, and a 1.4 multiplier for the price-based opportunity costs. This is the same structure that the Hydro DEB has today. The Hydro DEB basically multiplies the short-term opportunity cost times 1.4 and everything else times 1.1, and then takes the maximum to define its DEB. We are basically replicating that approach here. And then in real time, it's really here is where the time of day concept gets its name. Is that in real time, for both EDAM and WEIM, we would use a multiplier that varies across the day so that we can shape the DEB, represent those changing opportunity costs, and minimize the challenge of prematurely dispatching this asset due to mitigation. So I see a hand in the room and then one on the phone. Let's go with the room first. Yep.
Don Trethewey, California Energy Storage Alliance. Did you consider, rather than using the resources LMP in CAISO or in the EDAM, to basically using, for instance, in the CAISO footprint, the trading hub of the relevant resource, and you could continue to use the DGAP price for like PAC West and PAC East, and then it would be, in my mind, it would be all of them would be equivalent in terms of how you do the DEB.
Yes, this is something that we did discuss a bit internally, and overall, we find that this approach that we're including in the table here, this is its sole difference between EDAM and WEIM resources. And for us to iron out that difference, to eliminate that wrinkle and that they're more comparable, as you suggest, Don, we need to do away with some level of accuracy and precision that we have in today's framework by looking at the LMP. And we do not find it to be a desirable outcome to kind of affect the precision that we already have in a market for the EDAM assets, just to be able to ease out that bit of a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what the difference in the DEBs would be if you did trading hub versus resource. I do think there is there is some elegance in not actually doing it at the resource level, if you think, in terms of the scaling. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment, Don. We'll look forward also to see that in your written comments. Let's go on the phone with Paul. And please, a reminder for folks on the phone to introduce yourselves and your affiliation. Thank you.
Hi, this is Paul Nelson with the CPUC Energy Division. Can people hear me okay?
Yes.
I've got a question on the gas floor. And are we essentially still assuming that gas is always going to be on the margin? Looking forward with the retirement of gas. And I think in the springtime, we do have periods where we've got renewable curtailment. I'm just trying to understand the continuation of always using a gas floor.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Paul. So let me go to the next slide because I think this might help. I really debated which one to put first, if the formula of the table, but I thought the table presented an easier narrative first. So here you can see the formula, and basically, as you can tell, the gas floor is included within the DEB calculation in real time and day ahead, but as part of a max function, right? So the gas floor's inclusion is intended to capture whether in a given circumstance that, gas prices are very materially high, they're actually kind of setting what would be the cost, the marginal cost for an asset instead of the storage or instead of hydro. Then it's when the gas floors would be material in the DEB calculation. In many other days, as you mentioned, if we have really low fuel region gas prices, in some instances, actually, gas prices can even go negative. In those circumstances, the gas floor would not contribute really to the DEB calculation. If it's not the highest value by virtue of the max function, it would not influence the DEB. It's really there so that in a situation where we see a very material spike of those prices, we can capture that informs the opportunity cost of the storage, right? Because leveraging that storage or hydro in the example, or we know that the hydro DEB includes this, is basically in contrast or in substitution of burning through gas by other assets. Does that help, Paul?
Not really. You said it's a max function. I'm looking at here at that. So you said when gas isn't on the margin, it doesn't become binding?
No, I'm speaking more about the cost of gas in the fuel, the
Right.
cost of on the region gas price. When it is not, tremendously high, if you have negative or very low costs, this gas floor would not be the defining variable of the DEB, right? Because let's say let's look at the first line here. It's the max of the variable storage operation costs times 1.1, or the price-based opportunity cost times 1.4, or the gas floor times 1.1. So in a regular day, the most likely outcome really is that the price-based opportunity costs are setting the day ahead DEB, right? Because it has a higher multiplier. It's completely kind of like related to when the asset is able to see the most revenue. It's only on days when you would see a very high gas floor element that gas floor element becomes what the DEB would hinge on because of that max formula that it's within. So it's not really saying we're always going to keep gas. It's more so acknowledging that for energy limited resources, in many cases, the alternative of running them is leveraging the conventional fleet.
Okay, I'll stare at the equation some more. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I'm not seeing other hands on the phone or in the room, but we'll give it another minute or so. Well, minute is too long. 5 seconds.
Sergio, I'll bite.
Yeah,
So I was going to wait for this question when you got to your examples, but can you talk through why you would have a multiplier that's less than 1?
Yeah.
I think that could get to a problem to where, what Alva was bringing up, that if you actually, charge for $50, but then you take 60% and you look at some of your prices, you could get below that value. And so if you had a 1, for instance, then you'd never really ever get that situation, I would think.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Don. This is an area where we definitely welcome you all commenting and providing us feedback, right? In the last round of comments, we got very interesting and detailed comments from DMM that kind of leveraged this notion of the time of day concept. And in their findings, they kind of conclude 2 things. The first one is that using multipliers beyond 1.3, 1.4 doesn't yield kind of additional assurances, let's say. It kind of, the value of those multipliers tapers off. And in their comments as well, they also paired these higher multipliers with mirrored lower multipliers in other hours. Like this idea of, if we're going to go as high as 1.4, then we could go as low as 0.6. So that's why we've included it here. But we also can see the argument for limiting the multiplier to be no less than 1. And I think there, the appetite to do so is really, we want to minimize the risk of incremental discharge in hours where it could be problematic by having quite a low deb. So again, I think the notion of how to use the multiplier is kind of well understood, and we've shared it in prior meetings. But the range is something that would welcome feedback, of course. If it's not 0.6 to 1.4, maybe it's just 1 to 1.4. That's something that we'll look forward to your feedback. Do you have any thoughts on that response? Yeah.
No, I think having showing that you have, remember, we're trying to capture opportunity costs that are outside the market horizon. And so I think, having a look, there is an opportunity cost to not discharge earlier before the morning transition. And there's also not to discharge before the evening transition. And I could see that the opportunity cost for the morning is different than the opportunity cost during the middle of the day. And so I can see that. I just can't see, but like, for instance, when we look at your price curve, I just couldn't see mitigating someone down to such a low price during the peak, back to what if storage ended up being, marginal.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Don. And I agree fully. Well, first of all, I really appreciate that you're already putting the idea of looking at price based opportunity cost beyond the horizon, the second part of the conversation today. But I also think that what we're trying to show in the illustrative example I've included here too is that difference, right, between there will be opportunity costs both ahead of the morning peak and the evening peak, but we do want to maybe prepare for them by scaling the deb a bit differently. But it could be viable that the lowest values are not below 1, and rather, let's say, the multiplier is between 1 and 1.4 rather than 0.6 and 1.4. We have Alba on the phone again. Go ahead, Alba.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of connect what sort of what Paul and Don were saying to what you had said. I think you put it very well in the previous slide, which in discussion of the previous slide, we don't have to go back to it, but that the point of the gas multiplier is to say that incremental discharge may have to be displaced by use of a peaker at some point later in the day. That is a real possibility, no matter what the current conditions might be. And so the most sensible way to think about incremental discharge is it should always be worth at least that much as a way of hedging the risk of having to dispatch peakers. So I agree with Don on the range of the multiplier, and I think that's kind of the answer to Paul's question. It's not what's on the margin in the sense of where prices are that's kind of built into the price-based opportunity cost, but it's sort of looking at there's always an element of if you discharge now uneconomically and then later have to use. In fact, it's actually worse for the emissions to have to then go to a peaker because you don't have storage.
Yes, thank you for that, Alba. You put it very succinctly. I appreciate that. Okay, so going back to the slide. Oh, sorry, I see another hand from Callie. Let's go with Callie.
Hi, it's Callie.
I think she dropped, so let's go ahead and re-add her.
Hi, it's Callie. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Callie Wells with WPTF. And apologies if I missed this or if you're gonna touch on it later, feel free to defer my question then. I was curious if you guys have walked through or have you thought about how you're going to apply this DEB to the charging portion of the operating range. That's always kind of a nuance there that I think we need to at least talk through at some point in time. And again, apologies if I missed it, if you already went over it or if you're planning on.
Yeah, no worries, Callie. I touched on this shortly, briefly a bit before, but let me go over that again. So everything that I'm sharing with you all here, I've tried to define and frame as the discharge step. Because what we have found is that instances related to charging site mitigation, they actually have to do less with how the DEB is defined and more with the need to preserve monotonicity of the bid curve when the asset is mitigated. So our plan to incorporate that guiding principle of minimizing charge side mitigation is really more so than to have another charging DEB calculation. More than that is having a process that would revise or that would basically revise the charging part when the DEB comes into effect, when the resource is mitigated, so that we can preserve that monotonicity without limiting the ability of the asset to charge. So I'll give you a quick example. No, like today, if an asset submits a bid curve that part of its charging bids are above the DEB, and then that asset is mitigated, the market will mitigate those charging bids to the DEB. No? So that's why the DEB is material today. But in an alternative framework, what we could do is simply ensure that there is the necessary difference between the last mitigated discharge DEB and the next charging DEB, so that it respects the spread that the asset had submitted and that it doesn't impede the asset from charging. So I guess the long story short is we are considering this as part of our proposal, but more so than a recalculation of the charging DEB is more about a process to adjust a bid curve subject to mitigation so that it can comply with the monotonicity requirements without impeding charging.
Oh, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I wasn't suggesting that there's a different formulation for the charging side. It was just
Oh, yeah.
how are you guys planning on adjusting the DEB to ensure that the charging bids, you still have that monotonicity and there is some sort of difference between the charging bid and the discharging bid when it's subject to mitigation.
Yeah.
So, okay, glad to hear you guys are thinking about how to make that adjustment. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So I'll close out this topic walking through a little example of how this would look like. But before I leave this slide, I just want to kind of underscore that from our perspective, this approach is really capturing a lot of the feedback we've seen, right? From MSC, our market participants, the people that have expressed interest in the time of day concept, as well as the people that have expressed interest in basing off the new storage DEB on the hydro DEB. We think that this kind of hits all of those boxes, and I'm going to show how we are imagining this would play out for a real-time DEB for an EDAM resource. So this is an example. This first slide is just showing what we do today. So this is the real-time DEB calculation today. We're looking at the energy cost, the variable storage operations cost, price-based opportunity cost, duration, and efficiency. And under the formula today, we would get a DEB of 45.1. In this illustrative example of the table and formula I just discussed, we would first take the LMPs and scale them relative to those differences to the real-time LMPs. Here, I'm using a value of 5% higher, 1.05. Please note that that value is not final. It's just used for illustrative purposes. And that would give us a new scaled LMP table. And based on that table, we are now able to calculate the price-based opportunity cost. In the table I have on the right, you can now see that we no longer have the energy cost, but now we've included the gas floor. The gas floor in this example is assuming a cost of $1.5 in that fuel region price, and using the formula for the gas floor, that gives us a gas floor value of 18.4. So in this context, we're looking at the max between VSOC, price-based opportunity cost, and gas floor. The price-based opportunity cost is clearly the greater one, right? 43 versus 10 and 18. So now we're going to do the shaping multiplier part. And here we are trying to achieve kind of what Don and I were just discussing before, that we want to recognize that there is value for the stored energy ahead of the afternoon peak, the evening, and also there's value ahead of the morning. So here we are having a higher multiplier of 1.2 for all the hours ahead of the morning peak, starting in hour ending 23, actually. So starting in the evening prior, right? We have a higher multiplier that is trying to recognize, hey, there's value for this stored energy in upcoming hours, and that's the morning peak. And then we have an even higher multiplier during the solar hours that is trying to recognize there's even higher value ahead of the evening peak. These higher multipliers are all paired with lower multipliers during the peak periods. And the intention of these lower multipliers during those peak periods, the morning and the evening, is that the DEB would not impede discharge. We wouldn't want to set it to a level where we can't use the resource when we were planning for it to be used, right? But again, we could achieve a shape like this with a multiplier not going below 0, as we previously discussed in the conversation here in the room. This is basically just like an expanded version a zoomed in version of the illustrative shaped depth. And to kind of close out a bit this discussion here, only 2 minutes over, we think that this addresses the principles and issues that we included in the December paper. It allows for the reflection of changing real-time opportunity costs because of the multiplier. It ensures the correct placement of storage in the bit stack by harmonizing this depth structure with the hydro depth. It addresses the challenges of having stale values because of that scaling multiplier. And it offers a formulation where any storage resource can readily leverage a dev option with very minimal differences that are mostly really related to the accuracy of the calculation. So with that, I'll pause here, welcome any discussion, conversation on this. And yeah, I see there's 3 hands already. Maybe in the interest of time, it would be ideal if we can have like 5 commenters and then move on to the next topic. Yeah.
Let's go to Alva. If you guys can be really brief, please introduce yourself. Oh,
Thank
go
you,
ahead, Alva.
Brenda. Thank you. I will be very brief. I just think a 5th bullet here is that the method you're introducing brings predictability to the real-time DEBs. These can be made available prior to the start of day and allow predictability in terms of bidding and the results in the market. So I think that's another good aspect of the time of use multipliers.
Thank you, Alva.
We have Paul Nelson, CPUC Energy Division.
Hi, it's Paul again, and my apologies if I missed this subtle point. So for the time of day multipliers, are you thinking that those would vary? Because you're trying to get a shape. Would those vary by month? Or would they even vary every day depending on what the weather forecast or what the projections are? Because obviously solar and wind also impacts the shape of the optimal discharge and charge. So what were you thinking about that?
I think these are multipliers that we would, it wouldn't vary as granularly as by day. We think it's more so similar to the scaling multiplier that I mentioned before. It would be some form of assessment that we can do, we can perform for, let's say, the last N months or N years, and that can inform our multiplier for 2027, let's say, and then on a yearly basis, we're able to update that. This is
You're
not
thinking
something that we
these
are
would be set.
imagining.
So you think these would be set for the entire year using this, or like monthly, and then you'd like set these each per month, like a year ahead, and then another year you'd reassess for the following year how to set these monthly. That's, I think, is kind of my follow-up question on what you said.
Yeah, I think at this point, we're not thinking of something that would change monthly.
You're
It's
thinking
something more
annual,
so
and these
that
would be set.
we could update on a yearly basis, perhaps. Yeah.
It just seems with the time of day changes that occur, just because obviously this is being driven by solar too. It's such a huge impact with solar that those hour endings are going to change from between January and June. I would think these could change radically, but I'll leave it to you and other people who know the details of this better than me. So
Yeah,
you.
well, I definitely understand the source of the comment, and I think that's something that we want to have a paradigm that is durable, but also can be adapted as time goes on. I think also it's important to note that, the DEB, let's put it this way, the DEB is not the sole determinant of dispatch or behavior in the market, right? This is only material under mitigation for those assets. As we've seen before in data presented in this effort, it's not, incredibly frequent, right? So that's something we can take in consideration of how to update and, keep it fresh. And we look forward to your comments. Yeah.
We do have Renee and then Kelly.
Yeah, hi, Renee Steichen from Rev Renewables. Appreciate you walking through this and the example. I was still digesting your response to Paul, but I think my comment was essentially similar to Paul's of how the multipliers are going to be calculated and how frequently, and whether that's something that will be shared with stakeholders ahead of time. So I'll leave it there and continue to think about it, but appreciate your response to Paul on that. And, I think I'm also leaning towards probably needing some maybe more frequent updates, especially as I guess real-time conditions always change, although I understand like the shape of the day may be similar. So I'll leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly, you're the last one. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Callie Wills with WPTF. I'll make it brief because I think both the previous commenters had a similar ask, and that's really just to make sure we understand how both the multipliers and I think the scalars, when you do that first adjustment, the difference between the day ahead and real-time LMPs, how those are being calculated. Maybe you guys can do some analysis that kind of shows the justification for how you're calculating them and what they'll be set at initially. Do we need to do some seasonal adjustments there? And then also, hopefully, in the next iteration, you guys can provide a little bit more detail on exactly how you are planning to adjust the DEB when you get into the charging side. I know you said you're thinking about that, but I think it'd be really good if we understand exactly what you guys are planning on doing there, and what that proposal's like. So thank you.
Stan Trethway from CISA. One of the things that we had brought up previously was, if you saw, for instance, the operator saw that the system-wide state of charge of the storage fleet was deviating significantly from day ahead, which was optimal, that you may then want to trigger, move it from a 1.4 to a 1.6. But I think you would have sort of the basic shape that you want is something that could be relatively static, but I think you still want the opportunity to where if you see real-time conditions wildly deviating from day ahead, that then you trigger that to even higher opportunity cost.
Yes, thank you for that, Don. I think both that and the comments of Callie as well are something we can explore more in our straw proposal too, and we welcome your written feedback on if you have any preferences as well. Like, for example, several comments right now were around how do we source, calculate, update multipliers. It would be incredibly valuable for us if in your written comments you can share with us, oh, I think it should be quarterly or seasonal or anything like that. We welcome your feedback. Okay, I am not seeing any other hands. We're doing good on time. So I'll move now on to the second topic that I wanted to share with you all, and that is also part of how we are thinking the next straw proposal. I think this topic is a bit, conceptual. So I would greatly appreciate if we can do a kind of pauses for questions as I wrap up each of the little sections here. So I wanted to share with you all a concept that had been put forth by the MSC around kind of reframing the bidding from NGRs. This is directly related to this DEB discussion we just had. But first, I want to start a bit even at a higher level. So in their 2020 opinion that I just talked about around default energy bids, the MSC also discussed the challenges of end effects and how these affect storage bidding. So end effects refers to the fact that we have limited look ahead in our optimization processes, right? In day ahead, we're looking at the whole day, but not necessarily beyond that. In real time, we're looking at the next couple of hours. And these end effects result in the fact that we may be undervaluing the energy that remains in the storage asset after the horizon. And this leads to difficulties in managing state of charge, right? So let's imagine in day ahead, at the end of the day, at the end of that 24th hour, the market basically ends, right? There's no more look ahead in that optimization. So it does not recognize necessarily that there is an economic value in that remaining state of charge. In this opinion that we've been alluding to, the MSC put forth a bidding concept that could address some of these end effect challenges without really necessitating the creation of a brand new paradigm. So in that opinion, the MSC also commented on the end of hour state of charge parameter that we have today. So today, a storage resource, they can submit an end of hour state of charge range or value, and they can say, basically this says to the market, by the end of this hour, I'd like to be within this state of charge range or at a point estimate. If you can, markets, save this energy for later, and the market will respect that, even uneconomically. It will even dispatch the resource uneconomically to make sure that it meets that range. In that opinion, the MSC says, this is great. It can help us alleviate some of the end effects, but they recommend going a step further. And they recommend basically what they call a dual approach, where a scheduling coordinator could both say the range or level of state of charge that they want to be at the end of the horizon and assign a dollar per megawatt hour value to the energy at the end of that horizon. So now they're not only saying save this for later, they're saying save this for later because I value it at this much, right? I value every megawatt hour at this many dollars. So the MSC argues that this would be desirable, this form of bidding, this form of thinking about storage would be desirable because it would allow for a more effective way to manage deviation from the scheduled state of charge. And when we talk about the scheduled state of charge here, we're referring to the state of charge resultant from the day ahead outputs, the day ahead processes. So why does the MSC think this is valuable? They think it's valuable first because deviation from the market dispatch coming out of the prior market run will always come today from adjusting bids and offers, right? Today, if a storage resource wants to deviate from the state of charge resultant from the day ahead market, they need to submit a new bid curve, right? They need to submit a bid curve in real time that says, I'm willing to discharge at 10 megawatts if the prices strike this value, and so on. And this will always be complicated for a scheduling coordinator because there are random events that affect prices. There's an asymmetry in knowledge of system conditions. And as we get more and more storage, they will be played by endogeneity issues, right? They need to get ahead of price forecasting and get ahead of how every other storage asset is trying to get ahead of price forecasting. So the MSC recommends a bidding paradigm where deviations from the scheduled state of charge are handled by the assets updating and submitting the energy value of the energy that remains beyond the optimization horizon. And this is not so dissimilar from what we do today because the market optimization is already internalizing a series of costs and parameters that are relevant. So we're bringing all of this up because the depth concept that we just discussed, it can be readily leveraged under what we do today. but it could really benefit from this reframing of the bids from storage resources. And the idea that I'll explore in more detail here is to reframe storage bidding so that really what we are asking storage owners to submit is a bid or offer for deviating the end of horizon state of charge from its initial or expected level, right? Let me restate that maybe more simply. The bid from storage resources now becomes their willingness to pay or willingness to accept ending in the state of charge that is different than where they started in day ahead or different than where they would be at relative to the day ahead outcome in real time, right? And we expand on this in the upcoming slides. So to better understand this concept, I think it's very helpful to ground ourselves on what the market does today. This is something that we've discussed in different ways through this initiative. So I'll try to offer kind of a synthesis of the most important parts for this concept. So today, NGRs must submit a monotonically non-decreasing bid curve, which basically means the steps are going up. And you can imagine this bid curve. It can have up to 10 pairs of a megawatt output and $1 per megawatt hour pairing. In this example, I constructed, a bid curve where the assets took advantage of all the pairings they could use, but in reality, storage resources do not need to submit 10 segments. They can submit fewer than that. So today, the specific $1 per megawatt hour value is not the sole driver of dispatch. We've discussed this before as part of the MIO discussions, but basically today, within the optimization horizon, the market is able to schedule assets based on the difference between their highest offer to charge and their lowest offer to discharge. And this becomes important or valuable within the optimization horizon, right? Because within that optimization horizon, what this bid curve is telling the market is I need at least a difference of $15 per megawatt hour to be in the money. So it's not necessary that this exact dollar per megawatt hour prices strike for the battery to be dispatched within the optimization horizon. What is necessary is that the bid spread is respected. This basically becomes the minimum arbitrage value, right? The minimum amount of money that you need to make for it to be, for the asset to be in the money. So how does this work today? Today in day ahead, I think day ahead is the easiest example to think about. In day ahead, we're doing the optimization for the whole day in one go, right? So under today's bidding paradigm, resources are submitting this whole bid curve, and we look at the implied bid spread, and we are able to optimally schedule the resource within that optimization horizon. We put it to charge when it's the cheapest and discharge when it's the most valuable, treating that bid spread as the arbitrage minimum value. Now, this, however, does not communicate to the ISO, really, if the asset would wish to end the day with a higher state of charge or not. It doesn't communicate either to the ISO what is the relationship between the initial day ahead state of charge and the end of day state of charge. Those are all consequences of how we look at this arbitrage minimum bid value. In real time, the story is even more complicated, right? Because in real time, under today's bidding paradigm, the storage resources, again, submit that whole bid curve with all those megawatt and dollars per megawatt hour pairings. But because of the shorter optimization horizon, we actually care about the bid spread only when we see state of charge constraint within the horizon. And this makes it quite complex for scheduling coordinators to get ahead of price formation and obtain the outcomes that they want. This is complicated again by the same factors that I described before. There's random events. The scheduling coordinators have asymmetrical knowledge of the system, and there will always be endogeneity issues, right? They need to get ahead of what all their other competitors that are basically facing the same problem are going to try to do to mitigate this problem. So the notion here is really that we could reframe storage bits, basically give a new meaning to the storage bits, so that they are really a reflection of the asset's perceived value of the store megawatt hours beyond the optimization horizon. Why would we do this, right? Because as I mentioned before, we don't need every element of the current bid structure within the optimization horizon. Within the optimization horizon, we actually need more just that minimum arbitrage spread or the implied bid spread that we need today. But within the bids, if we frame them as the value of the stored energy beyond the optimization horizon, that allows us to financially link the initial and end of horizon state of charge. And it allows us also to capture the desire of that scheduling coordinator to either end the day or the trade hour or whatever horizon with more or less state of charge. And that is something that we want assets to be able to convey, because it is trying to capture those costs beyond what the market is already endogenously considering. So how does this work? We would have a bidding paradigm where the storage owners, the scheduling coordinators, are actually submitting a bid or offer for deviating their end of horizon state of charge from the initial level. We would have these assets submit this bid or offer to reflect that willingness to pay to increase the end of horizon state of charge, or their willingness to be paid to reduce their end of horizon state of charge. And with this, we would really eliminate the need for scheduling coordinators to have to think ahead of every trade hour what prices will be like, so that they can submit a bid curve, as I showed before, and that they can get ahead of price formation to obtain the state of charge management outcomes that they desire, right? By doing this, we are able to recognize the outcome that the scheduling coordinator prefers. You know, I want to end this day with more state of charge. This is how much I'm willing to pay, while optimizing within the horizon what we get out of that resource, right? So it really minimizes the complexity of how we might need to think about bids, particularly for the scheduling coordinator. I see there's a hand up. I'd like to cover just a couple more slides and we'll go to hands. But under this paradigm, we're really just changing the framing of the bid. We are not changing how storage is settled, and we are not changing how the bid influences decisions within the optimization horizon. Storage will still be paid for what it charged, and it will still be paid and charged for what it injected and withdrawn. We're not settling directly on the state of charge. We're settling on the injections and withdrawals at a megawatt value, and the prices continue to emerge naturally from the process we have today. Because remember, we are effectively already doing this within the optimization horizon. The difference we're discussing here is around what the bid means from the scheduling coordinator perspective, not how the market is treating that value. So the next couple of slides explain how this would work in day ahead and real time through some brief examples. But maybe before we go there, it's a good time to go to a question on the phone.
Let's unmute Alva.
Yeah, Sergio, this is great to see a really radical proposal being brought up like this. It really inspires a lot of thought. I wanted to just ask, what you think about some of the factors. I think there are other factors in bidding a battery, or there could be other factors in bidding a battery that it would be difficult to capture in this paradigm. One is that it's assumed that the variable cost is entirely static, whereas I think it actually encompasses some opportunity costs of its own. For example, if the battery is being overutilized, there's no control on throughput in this model, and so that becomes one. And the only way that you could affect that here is either with that end of that single value, or by trying to change the variable cost. And similarly, if there were periods of the day that a battery really had strong preferences not to charge or not to discharge, perhaps because we're looking at a future DER kind of setting, or where or a setting in which batteries are used for multiple purposes. I'm just curious whether you think those kinds of complexities can be dealt with in the model, or do they, or are they to what extent are they challenges to this kind of model?
Yeah, thank you for that, Alva. I'd say the first one is a challenge that could be dealt for in this model. Today, storage resources, they can submit that variable storage operating cost value, and to the degree that that is submitted, this paradigm could leverage that to inform the optimization of the resource. I think the second piece, it doesn't present a different type of complexity, let's say, that it couldn't be avoided through other mechanisms the resource might have. Like under this paradigm, you'd still be able to use the end of hour state of charge range, no? So that also would allow you
I
to
see.
say,
Okay.
let's get to this level at this hour, and I'd like to like shepherd the state of charge in a particular way. Similarly with, for example, even being a price taker, a self-schedule. I think that last part of your question, though, offers more interactions and complexities that we need to think about, really in the context of having must offer obligations for certain resources. And
Right.
I think that is a piece where we'll need to develop that a bit more internally ahead of our publication, our posting. But we are thinking about it as well. Yeah.
And I guess also initial state of charge for the next day in the day ahead bidding, that would still essentially effectively have to be a bid parameter, right? Even though it's it's something that has some strategic risks, but nevertheless you have to essentially, since CAISO cannot hold a battery to an initial state of charge, and that's crucial to evaluating this value of carryover, you'd have to essentially have that as a second parameter in this structure, probably, right?
Yeah. So today, when a resource submits their day ahead bids, the inclusion of the initial day ahead state of charge is there as optional. I think on a paradigm like this, we'd want that value to be submitted because that way we can have that direct linkage, right? Of I started the day at 50% state of charge. I'd like to end it at 60%. And this is
Right.
how much I think the energy stored is going to be worth in the next day. Really,
Yeah.
under this paradigm, we wouldn't even need those two last values to get a very similar outcome, right? Let's say, as long as you give us where you start the day and your willingness to end the day higher or lower, you're bound to have an outcome that
Right,
puts you in that range. Yeah.
right, right. In a sense, your initial state of charge is also the final state of charge, and then you're just giving a value of energy that can
Mhm.
vary around that value. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and to connect it again to that, I think before we go to the next question is, and that is almost what we're doing today with the um, implicit like minimum arbitrage value, but now we are calling it out explicitly of like what each of these elements actually means and how the market will treat it. Yeah.
Right, right. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. I think we have Kathleen.
Go ahead, Kathleen. Please introduce yourself. You may be double muted.
Excellent. I was just saying, it's Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you confirm if you can hear me? Thanks.
Yes.
Yes, now we can.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, a couple clarifying questions. And actually, Alva's was helpful. I was going to go straight to maybe clarifying around what you've presented so far, but in the context of real time. But something Alva said did also bring up another question for me. So while you were on that frame of thought, the way that I heard you guys talk through that implies another parameter. So initial stated charges submitted today. We submit a bid curve and day ahead for current status quo. When he said initial stated charge could be thought of as the same as the end of day stated charge, but you talked through an end of day target. So I wanted to confirm, does that mean where you're envisioning adding another day ahead parameter for end of day?
Yeah, let me go back a couple of slides because I think that will help a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, here, no? So today, storage resource could submit something that would be like the end of day target, no? They could say in real time,
In
my
real
end of
time,
hour
yep.
state of charge, sorry, in day ahead, my end of hour state of charge for hour ending 24 should be this amount. So basically you are doing what this first bullet here says. Save this much energy for later. They're not obligated to do that, but they could. What this approach would do is, well, now you can do either of those things or both even, you know? In day ahead, you could tell us, this is my initial day ahead state of charge. And you could say for the final hour, I want you to save this much energy for later. That's something that is already available. But on top of that, you can also say, assign this dollar per megawatt hour value to that energy. Or you could just pick one of those two. But by doing either of those, it conveys to the market, this asset has a strong preference of ending the day with more state of charge, or this asset has a preference of ending the day with a lower state of charge when you assign the dollar per megawatt hour value. When you fix the level of state of charge, it's an even stronger indication to the degree that we will do it even uneconomically as we do it today with the end of our state of charge. Does that help, Kathleen?
I'm going to keep unpacking it if it's all right. So
Yeah.
so my understanding of the end of hour state of charge parameter is that it's only available in real time, and perhaps that's wrong, but what I hear you saying is it is available today and day ahead. When I was asking about adding a new parameter, maybe I'll ask it if you're confirming that the end of hour state of charge is available or will be available in day ahead under this
Yeah. Is
design.
that under this approach, it'll be available? Yeah.
Okay, okay, that is helpful. And yeah, when you say fixed, I believe you're referring to the end of hour state of charge parameter being treated as it's in the constraint and it's valued in the market at a penalty price. Are we using the
Correct.
same language? Okay. Versus submitting a dollar per megawatt hour value that would be associated with, let's say, relaxing that constraint.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's super helpful. What I'm confused about is whether or not that dollar per megawatt hour value that would be associated with the end of hour, let's say, evaluation in the model if it's a new parameter, a bid parameter to be submitted in addition to the bid curve?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, it would be different, but the bid curve, we would no longer need this whole 10-step kind of bid curve, really. What we
Yeah, what
would, yeah, sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, it's okay. What I'm hearing you say, and I think I'm almost there, so thank you. What I'm hearing you say is that the bid curves would be used as the economic value for the end of our SOC.
That the bid curve would be used as the submitted bid, which would not necessarily be a 10 segment bid,
Sure.
would be used as that economic value. Yes,
Yeah.
you're correct.
Okay, that's what it wasn't super clear when you presented, so I wanted to make sure to unpack that. So then let's say you have the horizon. So that's used for the end of day. I guess we can still use day ahead. Now it's available, it's used for the end of day. So hours within the 24-hour horizon, will that curve also be used to determine the hourly awards?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Kathleen, I think it
Yeah,
would
please
be very
continue. Thank you.
useful to go through this example because the example kind of tries to get at that. And it's trying to show how this given asset, let's say, would connect the initial day ahead state of charge to their bid to end the day with a lower SOC, let's say, and basically how much they're willing to be paid per megawatt hour to end up with a lower SOC. So here I constructed, this is, very simplified. I thought it would take us a bit longer to get into these conversations. So I'm glad that people are catching on to the idea and appreciating it. But basically the idea is you have this asset, it's bidding in day ahead, and it's saying, I'm going to start the next day of day ahead with 50 megawatt hours, which for this resource, let's say it's 50% of its state of charge. And this resource believes that tomorrow, the day of day ahead, the trade date, that the trade date will have higher prices than the day after tomorrow. No? They want to use their state of charge tomorrow because they believe that the days thereafter are not going to be as valuable. So they're actually saying, hey, I'm willing to end my day with a lower state of charge than my initial state of charge. And I'm willing to do that as long as I'm paid $25 per megawatt hour. This is already that value there. In an ideal world, like under this paradigm, is already internalizing the variable storage operating cost and the minimum arbitrage spread that this asset needs. It's telling me I need at least $25 per megawatt hour to be in the money, and I'm willing to offer it that much. And it could, this asset would also have the option to say, and I want my end of day SOC to be X value. But here they didn't pick it. No, they just gave us the economic amount. So you can see that then this results in a trajectory that is kind of following that duck curve kind of idea of, well, it's going to charge a little bit, then discharge in the morning, then it charges a lot during the solar hours, gets to full and stays there 1 hour, and then it discharges a lot. And by the end of the day, it ends at 40 megawatt hours of state of charge. So that's lower than how it started, and it got some value from it. Now, in real time, though, we have a very short look ahead. So the real-time end of horizon state of charge is always defined relative to the day ahead trajectory. And this allows us to financially link the outcomes of the prior market to this one while preserving the ability of the asset to bid to deviate if they find it economic. So now, if the real-time horizon ends at the hour boundary, then the real-time reference state of charge is the same as the day ahead state of charge in that hour. And if the real-time horizon ends in the middle of an hour, then the real-time reference state of charge is linearly interpolated. No? So what this allows us to do now is that every bid that the asset submits for every operating hour is defined in these terms. I am willing to pay this much to deviate a megawatt hour from the target relative to day ahead. No? And it could be to deviate positively or negatively. It could be your willingness to pay or to accept. So here in the same example, we have the same guy. No? Now it's the operating day, and they recognized, I don't want to be stuck at 100 in that early afternoon, because this day is, the prices are even higher. I'm willing to discharge a little bit earlier in this period. So here, for hour ending 16, let's say, the asset says, well, now I want to bid to end this hour in a lower SOC relative to my trajectory before. And I'm willing to deviate to end up in a lower SOC if I get paid $50 per megawatt hour or more for that period. Again, this asset could also include an end of hour state of charge, but it didn't in this example. And this gets us to, okay, now we have a revised trajectory of the asset deviated. You can see there in green. And then later on, it bid in a way that put it back in its trajectory. This is just illustrating that this would allow for the capturing of that intent or willingness to deviate, which, if economic, the market will pick up. And with all of this, really the goal that this achieves is that we now no longer have this challenge of the real-time market being myopic. No, it's taking into account both what is happening within the optimization horizon, which it does today, but it's also taking into account the economic willingness of the asset beyond that optimization horizon, because that's what they're giving us in their bid. And it also makes real-time more consistent with the day-ahead financial position, because while we're still doing this form of incremental settlement, we are framing the bidding also as incremental relative to that day-ahead state of charge trajectory, which today presents challenges, right? We've discussed these challenges in the context of bid cost recovery, for example.
Sergio, I'm still off mute. May I ask one follow-up and then I will mute myself again?
Yes. Sorry, I thought
Okay.
you weren't there. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I wanted to let you were answering my question. Thank you. But I have one last, if you can go back a couple slides. I wanted to, yeah, one more, please. Yes, great. And I'll just say hour ending 17, it looks like we're discharging hour ending 17, right? So let's use that as an example. So my question for you is, let's say that's a $50 per megawatt hour bid. That's in effect during that hour. And it's discharging. Let's say this storage resource is marginal. Is the clearing price $50 per megawatt hour then?
Yeah, well, in this example, I didn't put all of the other assets. We could construct
No,
an
no.
example with
No,
renewables,
it's okay.
etc.
Just
Yep.
just conceptually wanted to confirm if the pricing stays the same as it discharges, it sets, if it's marginal, it's discharging, it's setting the price, or if something's changing, just conceptually, it's fine. Thank you. If you could explain that.
Yeah. So the LMPs will continue to basically emerge from charging discharge behavior. We're not settling directly against the SOC, so there's no change in how the price is formed. Yeah. And I think you just went off on mute back, but hopefully that addresses the question, Kathleen, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you for the engagement here. And I see Alva now.
Can we unmute Alva? Hey, Stacy, can we go ahead and unmute Alva Sabota?
This is Don from CISA. I'll
Okay.
go while you're trying to get Alva back on. So, Sergio, if we go back to the slide with the $50 on it. So if my variable costs were 20, then I would only be scheduled to discharge if the price was above 70, correct?
Yes, accounting for efficiency too. It depends where we put the efficiency, but generally, yes. Yeah.
And then I would only be scheduled to charge if the price was below 30, ignoring round trip efficiency.
Yeah.
Can you unmute?
Oh,
Go ahead. There you go.
okay. Alva, I think you're unmuted if you want to try now.
There you go.
Great, thank you. Just a quick thing that I think there are two things. One, I think there's a little bit more to be, is what Don was asking about and what Kathleen was asking about is relevant to what, is the incremental cost to be attributed to incremental discharge going to be that easy to derive from the end of day number, given what can happen in between? But I think that probably you can come up with mechanical rules like that. I just wanted to point out on the real-time side that you would want to think about not deviations from day ahead, but deviations from day ahead plus real-time deviations up to some point. Because if you've already been taken off path, obviously you're not talking about going back. Unless people are just always put targets, which I don't think they would in this model, it's simpler. Then you'd want to sort of think about it in terms of additional deviations from day ahead rather than just straight out deviations from day ahead.
Yes. Yeah, that's a valuable point, Ella. Thank you. Don, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Don from CISA. I actually hadn't picked up in reviewing the slides just before the meeting that you were going to tie the real time to the day ahead SOC. I'd always viewed that having the ability to bid the end of hour state of charge is actually potentially another way to address the bid latency issue in real time, where, if you were a 4-hour battery, potentially you could have a price at 20% state of charge, a price at 40% state of charge, a price at 60% state of charge, and a price at 80% state of charge. Where if you were, fully charged, there's going to be certain instances where you'd be willing to discharge because that you can, for instance, get it back later in the day. And that would allow you to then reflect that versus just a single value.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of value in making this also state of charge dependent. I think that is something that would probably be a bit more involved in terms of developing it, but we are keeping that in mind too. And
yeah, and I would just add day ahead. It makes totally sense that there's one value in my mind, but just real time, it's just the difference because the horizon is so much shorter.
Because of the horizon and because of, as Alva mentioned too, the deviations that already happened in real time, the deviations past. Okay, we are a little bit closer to time here. So I'll just wrap this up rather quickly and we can take a small break before I pass it on to my colleague, Dinesh. So let me just note that, as I mentioned before, today, these resources, they can specify this end of hour state of charge range, but they can't specify a bid offer for deviating from it. But we do interpret that implied bid spread as that arbitrage minimum bid. So the idea, again, is maybe we need to think about how bidding could be reframed as this willingness to deviate from the initial or state of charge that end of horizon state of charge. And that would become the meaning of the bid and what is subject to the DEB we've been discussing if we go to that redefinition. We definitely welcome all your feedback on this discussion, particularly in the context of the DEB and some state of charge management comments we've received. We view this as, it mitigates the risk of inefficient dispatch. It makes it easier on storage scheduling coordinators because they don't need to worry about the potential impacts of price formation ahead of time when they're submitting their bid curve. And it does create this financial link that we see as valuable between day ahead and real time, something that we've tried to think about either in operational terms or others. I think this construct offers some of that alignment. So, we're only 2 minutes after, but I think it will be good to take a little break until 11. And then we'll come back to discuss our last topic where Dinesh will be presenting.
Thank you, everyone. We will be starting soon. Appreciate it. Okay. You're good. I just make sure it's on. But I'll go right.
Okay, so moving on to the next topic, the overview of the paper that came out a couple weeks back, the second revised straw proposal on outage management. So the following slides in the presentation is to give an overview of what was recently published. There's two groupings, major topics that are under this paper. The first half is going to be on the outage management and the OMS enhancements side of the house. And then the next part is on the modeling of storage nonlinearity. And we'll also include a couple comments on both stakeholder feedback and comments. Thank you very much for providing that, and an outline for next steps on these topics. So one thing that the second revised straw proposal does not include is there were a couple of potential BPM updates. One around clarifying outage reporting for all capability attributes. The second on adding storage-related cause descriptions in the nature of work table. And the third, to clarify the definition of state of charge. These potential BPM updates will be submitted by the ISO, including the feedback that we received from stakeholders, into the BPM change management process. So keep an eye out for those. They'll be coming in the next couple weeks. And more discussions and engagement can be held in that process. Okay, so moving on to the first section of the paper on enhancements to the outage management system, otherwise referred to as OMS. So what is the OMS? The OMS manages transmission and generation outages via outage cards. It's used to communicate availability, derates, and out of service conditions. And within the second revised straw proposal, there are 5 enhancements that are being talked about. One is about the automatic acceptance of outage change requests. The second is about power minimum re-rates on test energy cards, otherwise could be considered as testing out charging energy during the new resource implementation process. Improvements to the current 2 out-of-service checkbox functionality. Exploring partial outages for non-generation services. For example, having a partial outage for AS rather than a full outage for ancillary services. And the 5th is whether there could be overlapping outage cards. In response to the revised straw proposal, we received feedback about the need to generally enhance the OMS to better reflect storage operations. There are 3 priorities that kind of came out. One was enabling the overlapping outage cards. The second being adding automation to the acceptance of updates to existing outage cards. And the third being reducing manual reporting burdens wherever possible. A number of you also expressed interest in having a more defined implementation timeline, where the ISO had provided a timeline of no sooner than spring 2027, and the ask was for additional information on development effort, sequencing, and milestones to get to final implementation completion. So the next couple slides are breaking the 5 topics into a couple different buckets here. So first, on the things that the ISO has prioritized and is currently in the works of trying to get implemented is one is on the automation of accepting the outage change request upon submission. So when we are saying acceptance here, we mean that when a market participant submits that outage card change request, the system would update and reflect that change immediately, rather than holding the outage card as a whole in the pending state. And this will allow market participants to be able to make follow-on changes more easily, right? Because you can submit one change and then you can submit another change, and it'll keep on being in that submitted state rather than being in a pending state that holds the card. Now, note that acceptance means that the system update and reflects the change, but staff still needs to undergo full review and approval prior to approval of the change that has been requested. Another topic that is currently prioritized for phase implementation here is exploring enabling power minimum re-rates on test energy cards for storage resources during the new resource implementation process. So this is the idea that when a new storage resource or a storage resource that's adding new capacity wants to test its capabilities, it can both test, it can currently test the power maximum, but this enhancement will enable the storage resources also test the power minimum or the charging capability. And note that the testing here will still be constrained by master file limits and ISO approved testing parameters. In the second bucket, where the ISO is continuing to explore implementation prioritization, but does not have it slated for prioritization this year, is to improve the functionality of the out of service checkbox for both the charging range and discharging range, and also the topic to allow for non-null values to be included in non-generation outage cards, for example, ancillary services cards. This is due to the relative implementation burden, and also note that the ISO has heard stakeholder feedback that there is desire to pursue a modeled nonlinearity solution quickly. And this is something that may sort of take precedent over some of the outage management enhancements. System enhancements. I see a question online from Paul. Okay. Stacy, do you think you could unmute Paul? I think Brenda had to step out for a minute. Okay.
Hi, this is Paul with the CPUC Energy Division. A couple of slides ago, you said, if my understanding, so it was going to automatically implement an outage, but it still needs to be approved. And so sort of, I guess, two questions come to mind. One is, what happens if ultimately the outage is not approved? And what are the implications of, again, sort of the same way, if you automatically implement something that then later is not approved, how does that affect things?
Great question there. So, you know, the ISO staff takes it very seriously, where what happens if there's a change request and what that means for the system as a whole, right? So I think that is a conversation that can happen between ISO staff and the market participant that is looking to make the update to the outage card. The idea being that, well, maybe the market participant would prefer to keep the outage as is and not make the change, or the market participant may want to get rid of the outage change overall, and the outage card completely. That is a great question. I think that is something that the implementation teams or the operations teams can work out with the market participants.
Yeah, and if this is Sergio, if I can add something quickly. You know, today, if a market participant submits a change to an existing outage card, it will enter into a pending status, and it would stay as pending until that outage is approved. And that creates a time where the outage is neither reflected in the system nor able to be modified further. So what this change enables is, once it's submitted, it will be immediately ingested into the system. It will be immediately reflected into the system, and the market participant can edit or submit changes to that as well. In that time frame, now, rather than being pending and not conveying any information to the system or the market participant, with this change, it would be accepted. But if it's approved, then you know, we gained that time of the pending status, and we're now, you know, set for the next time frame. And if it isn't, we're basically back at where we would have been initially with that pending status. So basically, this allows for the system to reflect it and the flexibility to update it while still preserving our current approval process.
Thanks, Sergio. And maybe one more thing to add, Paul. Another way to think about this may be that, well, you know, that whether or not what happens when something doesn't get approved is actually not changing here, right? where that same process is still existing and the actual change that's going on with the automation is around that pending state rather than what is the approval process and what happens if something is approved or not. Does that help, Paul?
I guess I was kind of going into the direction of, since it automatically would impact the systems, you have a participant who's maybe not so benevolent on why they're implementing an outage, and then later gets denied. Since those are impacts of when it declares the outage have immediate impacts.
Maybe
Sort of where I was. That's kind of where I was hinting on that question. I'll be upfront about that.
appreciate that, Paul. And maybe, in response to that, it's reflected on the market part. It's reflected on the resources screen, right? So like it is essentially moved from approval to submitted under the new change, right? Rather than approval to pending to submitted, right? So, the ISO will still, the ISO staff will still undergo that full review and approval process as before. And so in that sense, your question about, well, what if there's a not so benevolent market participant? Well, the ISO is still reviewing it according to all approval processes that currently exist. Does that help?
Yeah, but I guess the question is I guess, can this be used as a tool for market manipulation?
Okay, so I think when we're saying that it is accepted immediately upon submission into the system, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily reflected in terms of the ISO's processes and the ISO's modeling. It's more accepted on the front end for market participants to see what's going on and being able to make additional changes more easily because they don't have to wait until it comes out of the pending state. So my view on this is that this would not, there is not a position where it would open the door up for market manipulation because the ISO's model is not changing until the ISO staff is making the change.
Okay, that subtle point I didn't fully realize. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate the questions. Okay. Stacy, do you mind unmuting our next commenter here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is John from SC. So from what I heard and what I know is that I believe this automation is really more so an automation for the CAISO staff as opposed to market participants. Is that true? So,
I think, go for it, John.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and I spoke to our outage folks, is that this automation is like the current as is state is really, if they submit a change, it goes into a pending status, which is a different bucket and which might not ever be seen in time by the CAISO staff. So this automation basically puts this change request into a different bucket, which allows for CAISO to actually review or potentially study the outage, right? So so I think this automation kind of is a little bit not. It's kind of deceptive when you put automation, right? Because really I think the details on how this change request goes into the queue of the study is more important than anything else, right? So for example, if there's an outage that's coming up and there's a change request on that, I think it's really important that change request go to the top of the queue rather than just gets put into the queue of all change requests or all studies. Does that make sense?
So Yeah, so thank you, John. That is I think you have a solid understanding of what the paper is reflecting and what this automation effort would mean. When it comes to actually moving things and changing what order is approved and studied, that is a larger change that is not being considered at this time in relation to this automation effort.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think if we're trying to automate things, and I think if, you know, if, I mean, what would be beneficial is really the change requests. Like there's some automation where the change request gets put in the queue depending on when the outage is going to occur, whether it's coming up or not. Because if, you know, if it's just going to be put in that steady state where it's going to be among possibly hundreds of other studies, then it could get lost, right? And so I think, you know, if we're gonna go ahead with any enhancements, that should definitely be considered.
Appreciate that, John. So when you're saying additional like when you're saying any enhancements, are you thinking about that from an any enhancements, meaning nothing else should move forward until we're able to have a prioritization of depending on what outage cards are coming when? Or is it a question more of additional enhancements, meaning that this is something that you would request that the ISO explore more, but also move forward at the same time with the things that the ISO has put forth in the second revised draw proposal? Just wanted some clarification about your comments there, John.
Oh yeah, no. What I'm saying is that I think this is a good enhancement, moving, you know, just skipping the pending status. But I think what would add a little bit more flavor to it, and what would benefit this enhancement or automation, is actually having that outage change request be prioritized higher if the outage is about to occur sooner than later. Does that make sense? So there has to be some type of like comparison between, okay, when is this outage versus the other outages, and which is sooner, and the ones that are sooner, it should be moved up in the queue higher as a higher priority item.
Appreciate that, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that we can take forward and sort of you know, take internally and have more discussions about, for sure. Would also recommend that as you're thinking about your written comments, this would be something that could be useful to include there. It's unclear to me whether it's something that could fit within the scope of the Storage Design and Modeling Enhancements Initiative. It is good to have those comments generally to ensure that we are keeping an eye on sort of what is important to you all and what is important to stakeholders more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stacey, could we move to our next caller, please?
Great. I think that is me. And this is Kathleen Colbert from District. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. No, really good conversation. I did want to start just thank you. You know, I want to thank the CAISO for bringing forward these proposals to make really important, critical operational improvements to the OMS system. I appreciate that you've evaluated the set that was like requested, and that some need to be phased and some can be moved forward, and fully respect that. I have questions that we'll get to later, but just on this specific auto accept proposal, I think it may help folks to, your slide says this, you said it, I wanted to mirror it back and kind of put an exclamation point on it, because I think the piece that may be helpful is that for forced outages, new forced outage cards that are submitted, they are auto accepted. And the logic behind that is that a forced outage has to be taken. For changes to a forced outage card, which also have to be taken, they have historically been put into this, as Dinesh has described, a pending status, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about a forced outage, whether that is a new outage or it's a change to that forced outage, essentially this policy change or this improvement would be treating both of those as non-discretionary, and so applying the same logic. And I think just knowing that this process is applied to new forced outages can be helpful to understand why extending it to changes may make a lot of sense. And I do also support the gentleman from SCE. Didn't catch your name, apologies. The gentleman from SCE who described how this can be helpful on both sides, both on the scheduling coordinator side as well as the grid ops side. We've had lived experiences going through and trying to make these changes during tight days or times when it has been incredibly stressful or appears stressful on the floor, and so I personally feel empathy towards the grid operators that have to then go on a recurring basis and review these changes to forced outages. I do hope that this helps them quite a bit. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen. And John, thank you very much for your comments as well earlier. Okay, with that, I'll continue with the presentation. Okay, so the next kind of group of topics is actually, I think we went through this already. So we'll move to the next slide. So final topic about the ability to have overlapping outage cards. So the ISO took this back and found that this enhancement would be cost prohibitive. So the ISO will no longer explore this proposal at this time. This is just something that it would require a complete reworking of the OMS system. And it's something that weighing sort of the cost and benefit, the ISO does not see it adding up. Okay, moving on to the second section of the paper, which is discussing nonlinearity. Okay, question from Kathleen.
Oh, yes, thanks. I didn't realize I'd be the exact next one in the queue. But Catherine Colbert from Vistra. No, Dinesh, I did want to unpack this a little bit, just because this is a pretty painful administrative burden, I'd say, maybe operational risk to some extent, but mostly it's just not having the ability to do this makes it very difficult for like our real-time operators during the day. So I would appreciate a better understanding of what is making it cost prohibitive. And the reason I wanted to push on it, just to help drive you in a good direction, what I'm curious about is the original ask was quite comprehensive. It was like allow overlapping outage cards on all of the parameters, right? Max energy, min energy, Pmin, and Pmax. What I'm curious about is that cost prohibitive, or is something smaller scoped possible, such as maybe, and confirming, I do believe Pmax overlapping is allowed today. And so considering maybe just adding Pmin, yeah, and if we could, I'll give you the mic back. If you could talk through that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Kathleen. This is Sergio. Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the initial ask was pretty broad, but overall, what we've identified internally is that the overlapping outage card functionality really would require a rework of a lot of the communication or kind of data pipelines as well. So while a smaller kind of subset of allowance for overlapping outage cards may be, let's say, easier, quote unquote, than the broader ask, it's not without its complexities and costs. I think at this time, what I probably would recommend is if you have a more narrow ask on this, please do include it in your written comments and we can run it back once more. But I think a part of why we are reaching this conclusion is it's kind of threefold. One, the first task was broad, yes. Two, even if not as broad, it's not without its complexities. And the final one is that when we first talked about OMS enhancements in our paper last year, we weren't thinking about accelerating the implementation of the nonlinearity model solution that Dinesh will discuss next. So I think in that context too is that we're thinking about what can be achieved in a similar time frame on OMS. So we are trying to balance all of those asks, all of those considerations, but we do welcome if you have a more narrow instance or example and you want to include it in your written comments, that can give us further food for thought that we'll take on. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, after I read your paper and then the slides, I have been workshopping it internally, so I'll just maybe echo that again for for other stakeholders who are also interested. We will put in comments what is a more narrow ask for you to evaluate, and I appreciate you taking that back. And this is important operationally to us, so thank you for your time.
Appreciate it, Kathleen. All right, Stacy, could we unmute Paul again? And just to, time check, we're at 11:32. Hoping to cover the nonlinearity piece by 12.
Hi, this is Paul with the CPUC Energy Division. Since we're talking about OMS changes, this kind of leads into the next topic is CAISO going to look into adding new nature of work outage codes? I think specifically one that's going to come up is the issue of foldback. I mean, this issue has become a big issue in the CPUC's initiative to calculate unforced capacity. So, and I think this probably expands just beyond, maybe potentially expands just beyond foldback, but I think adding codes that are more specific to storage resources and perhaps even solar and wind, since those are growing systems. When I look at the data, I mean, it was definitely written, those descriptions were definitely written looking at specific generators and not particularly the DC to AC that we're seeing, and then certainly not storage. So.
Thanks, Paul. This is Sergio. Quickly, I'd say we are not looking at creating new natures of work. Creating new natures of work is a pretty burdensome process that also requires material rework, and it's not trivial. What we've been doing so far is including clause descriptions as to what natures of work should be leveraged, and particularly with the issue of foldback, we've detailed that quite clearly in the paper of what nature of work should be leveraged. And once we have the model solution, which we're targeting spring of next year, there really will be a very little need for submitting outages to reflect nonlinearity or fallback. So I guess the most succinct answer is no new natures of work. We can tell people what nature of work to leverage through the cause descriptions, and we've done so regarding fallback. And once we have the model solution, I don't think they'll have to leverage those cards anymore, really. Yeah.
I'm disappointed, I guess, to not see a process of nature of work, because in calculating UCAP, I think it becomes important to understand these outage issues of what to include in calculating enforced capacity and what not to include. And it also affects, well, I guess not for batteries because you're using something a little bit different in your default mechanism, but help understanding how much of this is occurring. And that's one of the big issues. Certainly the CPUC has been struggling with this. We keep hearing about it, but we have no idea, is this a little problem or a big problem? Because there's no data, at least for us to look at.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, appreciate your comments there. I think one more thing to add, and we're going to get into the conversation about nonlinearity next, and also discuss which outage nature of work to use in the meantime moving forward. I think the goal, and I'll just leave it here for now, and we'll kind of continue the conversation throughout the nonlinearity section. The goal is to reduce the need for the outage card to begin with. So the idea would be, instead of having a separate outage card that is exploring that may or may not be something that falls under certain RA categories or not, the idea would be the ISO is modeling the said differences, and therefore is able to make sure that market participants don't actually need to submit the outage card to begin with. And the ISO is taking that on as an extra step. Does that help?
I think I said fairly clearly, you know, when trying to calculate UCAP, understanding why units go out in a little bit more clarified manner for batteries. I mean, there's the issue of foldback, and then I understand there's maybe it's a similar issue, but there's also voltage mismatches between the battery modules or containers that may not be strictly foldback, but they may have reductions in capacity or energy. I think we have to look at both that could be affected by that, and being able to understand that better in the data would be helpful.
Appreciate it. And with that, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, Paul, the ask is to consider, in between the time period that we have now and when the model solution is completed, to explore potentially having a separate data stream for outages that would then be feasible for, or then would in some ways be trackable for the CPUC when it comes to UCAP and UCAP looking backwards at what outage cards should apply. Is that accurate in terms of what your perspective is here?
I think right now, just tracking the outage cards. I mean, I think the discussion of what outages apply to the UCAP calculation can be is a separate issue that we'll take up in the CPUC and proceeding. But we need the data first. We need the data to even do the evaluation.
Got it. So the ask would be to recommend outage or have some sort of delineation of the data from asking market participants, such that the CPUC and the proceedings can make a decision about what data is included in the UCAP.
Correct.
Okay. Appreciate that, Paul. Thanks for the feedback. Okay. Quick time check, 11:38. Kathleen, is this something that is in response to Paul, or is this something that could be held until later in the session?
It's in response to Paul. Real quick. So as you consider that, I think the most important element that's needed to support that effort, in addition, smaller scope, is to include in the public curtailment reports the outages on the parameters that need to feed into that, which include the max energy and the min energy. Min is less important, but those two do need to be added in order for the regulatory, in order to implement new cap on storage. I want to assure you we're tracking that.
Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, moving on to nonlinearity. So from a high level, what is nonlinearity? Nonlinearity is when the charging or the discharging behavior changes as the state of charge changes. So in particular with lithium-ion batteries, when the battery is approaching an upper or lower state of charge limit, it changes what the rate of charging and discharging could be. So specifically here, when the battery approaches full, the amount that the battery can charge more declines. And when the battery approaches empty, the amount that the battery can continue discharging declines. And the current market model does not capture this nonlinearity. It assumes instead a rectangle that is bound by Pmax, Pmin, minimum continuous energy, and maximum continuous energy limits. And in this sense, one way to think about this chart is that the minimum continuous energy limit, at the minimum continuous energy limit, the model assumes that the resource can generate it from its full discharge to its full charge at that SOC. And same at the max continuous energy limit. So if a battery is completely full, the model is assuming that the battery could generate at its max generation at its Pmax, but also at its, it could also charge at its min gen or its Pmin. And so the second revised straw proposal builds on some conversations that were had regarding nonlinearity in late 2025 and early 2026. So in late 2025, just recapping some history here, the ISO proposed a clarification to limit the master file state of charge ranges to the region that is not affected by nonlinearity. So the clarification was to say master file values should be the range that is not affected by nonlinearity, and therefore there's no need to submit an outage card because your range should just be the area that's not affected at the ends. And the ISO framed this as an interim solution while a longer-term model approach was under development. And then Rev Renewables proposed that an approach to say, hey, maybe this is a way that could be modeled, specifically looking at parameters that could support real-time updates reflecting actual operating conditions. In response to the ISO's proposed clarification, we received many comments strongly opposing it. And in January 2026, the ISO shared that it would not pursue the clarification and would instead expedite the development of the modeled solution. The ISO also reiterated that under current rules, foldback behavior that prevents a resource from meeting RA obligations is something that is generally subject to RAIM prior to the implementation of the modeled solution. It is current policy. That is what the rules are. The ISO also noted that given current and anticipated development priorities and constraints, the ISO would pursue this as a priority. However, the very earliest this thing could be implemented would be spring of 2027. So in the second revised straw proposal, the ISO details this modeled solution. The ISO details it as a master file-based solution approach because it reduces the implementation complexity, which means that the ISO can get it done faster. It limits the opportunity for misuse associated with potentially with resources trying to skirt an outage reporting process by using sort of the modeled solution for nonlinearity. And it also incentivizes and encourages proper maintenance and operational practices that mitigate this foldback over time. So, you know, the idea is that we want resources to do the things that reduce foldback and actually incentivize that instead of just letting it be something that is the ISO is ambivalent to. And so in comparison to that rectangle, the ISO's proposed modeled solution that is largely consistent with the proposal presented by Rev Renewable at the November 11th stakeholder meeting, it turns that rectangle into a hexagon. And this will reflect the reduction in the minimum output when the battery approaches the sort of the upper limit, and also reflects the reduction maximum output as the battery approaches the lower limit. And so this is what it looks like. In my mind, the important things to look at is the space between the NL nonlinearity minimum energy and the minimum continuous energy limit, and then the space between the maximum continuous energy limit and the nonlinearity max energy. So taking that first nonlinearity minimum energy and minimum continuous energy limit into account. So an example of this could be like the nonlinearity minimum energy could be a completely empty battery, and a minimum continuous energy limit state could be where the battery is almost empty. And the idea here is to add a sort of another value where those two can be separate, where the max gen at that minimum, that almost empty battery could be at the P max, and then you've added another value that sort of dictates the ramp at where the battery sort of, when the battery has no state of charge at all, what that, or just before no state of charge, what that maximum generation capacity is. So that's what kind of that rectangle vertical column looks like. And the flip of this is also when the battery is the sort of the horizontal rectangle that kind of includes the red line at what happens when the battery is approaching the maximum, its maximum state of charge. So a battery that is completely full is at its nonlinearity max energy, and a battery that is almost full is at its max continuous energy limit. And the idea here is that when the battery is almost full, the battery may have a certain amount that it can charge, but as the battery approaches full, the amount that the battery can charge decreases, thereby increasing the Pmin to the until it reaches that nonlinearity max energy megawatt value. And so with the implementation of these additional constraints, the idea would be that scheduling coordinators would submit these four new data fields to the master file. And that is to help demarcate, well, what is that, how big is the region, and how big is the change in the power output capabilities of the resource. And note that because these are new master file fields, these changes to these values would follow the same process as other master file modifications. The ISO also proposes to include this in both the day ahead and real time markets. We heard from stakeholders that the real time was very important. And the ISO took this back and actually found that the difference between implementation on the real time and the day ahead is not huge. And in addition to that, there is an overall market design principle where reducing the differences in the variables and constraints between the different market runs produces a more consistent result. And this helps also limit undue financial arbitrage and inefficient financial arbitrage that may result from differences between the different models. And so this is kind of alluding to the conversation we were having with Kathleen, myself, and Paul and Sergio, where ahead of releasing a modeled solution, the ISO stands by its guidance that market participants can limit their risk of entering the nonlinear range by reflecting the state of charge range unaffected by foldback in the master file. So the idea is to say, well, take the battery that you have and what the idea of before it gets that almost full state and almost empty state where the battery can't reflect the continuous range, that is what should be represented in the market file. However, if market participants do not do so, any unavailability impacts due to nonlinearity can also be or should be conveyed via outage card submissions to prevent infeasible dispatches from the ISO. So this is consistent with current policy. This is consistent with the guidance discussed by the ISO. And if fallback behavior prevents a resource from fulfilling RA obligations, that underperformance remains generally subject, as before, to RAIM prior to the implementation of a modeled solution. The goal here is that this modeled solution significantly reduces the amount of outage cards needed to have nonlinearity come in. The idea here is that if with the model solution, the optimization engine can take that value into account and then limit dispatch accordingly. And note that this will allow resources to continue to meet must-offer obligations even when fallback occurs. Question from Alva.
Sorry, I was just going to get into the queue because I had a couple of sort of more detailed questions. When you can finish the description of the proposal, that I just had a couple of items I thought you should consider. So you can finish first.
Appreciate that, Alva. We're almost there, so 2 slides left, and then we'll go to you, Alva. Appreciate it. Okay, so because there is no outage in the modeled solution, the idea is that RAIM exposure is largely avoided. With that being said, the RAIM framework is currently under review in the Resource Adequacy Modeling and Program Design Initiative, and future interactions between that modeled solution and what comes out of those discussions will be addressed in that initiative. And so the ISO is targeting implementation no sooner than spring 2027. After implementation, the ISO will also go ahead and update the BPM language to reflect the changes, and those updates will go forth through the BPM change management process. Okay, great. Okay, questions. So when Alva comes back on, Stacy, could you unmute him, please?
Thanks. This is great to see this all laid out and to see that you're planning on implementing in this time frame. Just a few things that I hope will be addressed. There are some complexities here, and I hope they'd be addressed in the BPM or in the final proposal. What happens in terms of the ASS constraint? What is the effect on crossing the normal operating range where you have the maximum, effectively a maximum ramp rate, and then into an area where you have limited discharge or charge? And then finally, is there any effect from this change on either capability or bidding of imbalanced reserves? So I'm sure you can address all those, but I do think those details need to be part of the BPM so that we know that all of that's in hand when the implementation happens.
Noted. Thank you very much for those comments, Alva.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jake.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes, this is Jake McDermott with TerraGen. I wanted to thank you all for putting together this proposal. I think the modeled solution is a good step forward. There might be some longer term challenges to kind of think through, and I did want to support, I think, what I heard from Paul Nelson earlier on kind of having the correct data, because if when folks are taking forced outages now for foldback, you're going to get kind of double penalized on that UCAP D rate, because you're effectively, and we're expecting a decision, a PT from the PUC on some of these issues in the coming weeks. but if if your NQC, if your QC is supposed to be reflective in theory of your your discharge unaffected by foldback, that's kind of where it should be represented, and then you can kind of get double penalized on the back end if you're taking forced outages in the interim to represent that. So that's kind of one challenge. The other challenge, I think that it's probably good to think about in the longer term, and this is just kind of coming from speaking to some of our resource operators, is that sometimes you can see foldback occurring at different places within a state of charge, depending on how you operate the battery. And I kind of liken it to, driving down the road at 55 miles per hour and you get one really good speed limit, or excuse me, one very good fuel efficiency. And if you run your car at a higher speed, you see your fuel economy kind of change, right? And so I think as a result, you're going to see scheduling coordinators be quite conservative for those new modeled master file parameters to ensure that we don't hit the foldback ever. But then you have this real trade-off, right, of maybe not being able to access some commercially available energy because you're constraining a resource to a certain state of charge. So I think the last piece I just wanted to kind of touch on is those linear relationships that occurs at those breakpoints in the graph. And I don't have a good sense of this or a proposal, but I wanted to kind of point out that there might be different numerical ways to represent that relationship, meaning it may not be strictly linear. So I wanted to at least suggest that and get your feedback on that. So thanks.
Appreciate that, Jake. That is something that the ISO is aware of. And the modeling of a curve is something that is technically very difficult to do. So that, to put it lightly. So, but really appreciate your feedback and engagement on this matter, and for sharing those comments that you've received from your team.
Don Trethewey from CISA. First of all, we're very supportive of modeling nonlinearity. I do think, getting something in sooner rather than later is definitely important, and which means that we may need to forego, for instance, the ability to update it in real time to hit the September 2027 time, or the 2027 timeframe. But as TerraGen pointed out, that may actually limit the amount of foldback you can access. And which then brings me to what we're doing in the interim period. In essence, what we're saying, or the proposal is saying, is that you should not make any foldback available to the market, because if you make foldback available to the market, you're going to be penalized, even if you met your RA obligation to provide 4 hours, for instance, as meet your 4-hour requirement. And so that means people who want suppliers that wanted to offer their foldback in aren't allowed to do it without incurring a RAIN penalty, and CAISO can't access that capability because they don't even know that it's actually available. So I don't understand why we would take an approach to where we continue to try to penalize RAIN when what I just heard was a very clear articulation of a technical limitation that's not in the market model. And when it's actually in the market model, of course, it's not going to be subject to RAIN. Now, I do understand that we could have some people who have, 3.5 hours worth of duration. And, potentially then they're going to count for RA that they didn't meet their 4 hours. But I think there's a lot more people who actually are going to limit and not, in essence, keep capacity out of the market that could be available, especially during stressed conditions, simply because for this next summer, we don't want to sort of say we're gonna err on the fact that we want more supply, not less. And so we're gonna make it RAIN exempt by using technical limitations not in the market model. Because we know we only have to go one more summer with it, and then we've got it fixed.
Thank you, Don. I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think we've seen this ask from stakeholders throughout the conversation around nonlinearity. So I'd say a couple of things. First is that the position that we're sharing here is informed really by what we've been discussing with stakeholders since January, and we've been pretty clear on our intent to maintain what we see as the current applicability of policy ahead of a modeled solution. So now we're going to expedite this modeled solution, but we're still in this context where in the RA initiative, they're reassessing parts of RAIM. In the commission, they're reassessing parts of RA. So we would not want to invite further changes to what is being thought of around RAIM today here. We want to limit the discussion on the modeled solution as how it would apply, et cetera. I think in your question basically is leading to why can't we consider leveraging a different nature of work in the interim? And I believe, as we've stated in the paper and here, what we're sharing here is kind of like the read of the current policy, changes to that with regards to RAIM, outage card nature of works, et cetera, shall be discussed in that initiative. We've heard that ask here too, that we shouldn't bring in this RA impacts or topics here in. So that's the perspective at this point. Yeah.
I think what non-linearity actually shows is that the current RAIM penalty associated with storage is illogical because the assessment windows are not consistent with the 4-hour duration that you're trying to enforce from a penalty standpoint.
Yeah.
That's my point. So the fact that if anyone has any capability, that has met the 4-hour requirement, why would anyone make that available to the guys? Which means it prevents them from selling it at probably some of the highest price periods of the day, and even in peak needs during the summer. And CAISO doesn't have access to it because we're assuming that everybody actually doesn't meet the RA 4-hour requirement.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the need to rethink RAIM as it applies to storage. I don't disagree with that at all. I think what we're indicating here is those discussions. We've invited them before in this initiative, and we got the feedback that there should be clearly delineated between the RA discussions, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, great. With that, I'm not seeing any more hands on the line either. So we'll pass it over to Brenda for the next steps. Thank you so much for your patience today.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, Dinesh? Appreciate it. So thank you everyone for joining. This recording will be hopefully posted within the next 3 to 4 business days. We also have a comment template that we'll be posting shortly with the deadline of June 1st, and as well followed by the June 30th straw proposal posting. And we do have an upcoming other hybrid meeting on the 15th of July. We also want to make sure we align them with other meetings, with other hybrid meetings. So we definitely take that feedback to make sure if there's another meeting that week, we kind of go on the same date. But more meetings will be coming your way. Thank you. These are the links just to go ahead and follow, but you can also navigate through CAISO.com stakeholder initiatives, and all the way to the very bottom, alphabetical order, you'll find storage and modeling. But if any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or ISO Stakeholders Affairs. Lastly, we do have the Stakeholder Symposium registration just opened up last week. We are opened for all registration of sponsorship, as well as the Super Charge Pass and Charge Pass. Those are very different, so make sure you look at those registrations when selecting it and for paying for those to participate at the Stakeholder Symposium and welcome reception. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you guys have a great day. Pass it to Stacy to close.
That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.